Hey and howdy everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's Jeannie with Paper Pixie Ink, and today we are going to start on tutorial number 1 for the series on this Hello Pink Autumn kind of large mini scrapbook album. So I did use the A4 paper pad for the collection. I used one full pad and then a few out of another. I also used a 12 by 12 cut apart and some of the chipboard pieces and some of the ephemera pieces as well. So, and I also used some of the 4x6 journaling cards from the journaling card pack as well. So I also created some little journaling cards of my own with lines. I tried to match the color to, one of the tones within the collection, and I just made them in various sizes. So I have kind of some portrait, some landscape, large ones, and some smaller ones as well. So to get started, I went ahead and cut a piece of my batting to 20 and about 3/4 of an inch by 11. I cut 2 pieces of chipboard to 8.5 by 11 and 1 to 3.5 by 11. And then I cut a piece of my fabric. This is just some costume grade, like crushed fake velvet kind of look / feel. I got this from Joann's, and I cut that to about 24 inches by 14 inches. It's probably a little bit more than what was really needed, but I wanted to make sure that I had enough and that I wasn't pulling on the fabric, because this is kind of a stretchy fabric. And if you pull on it too much, then you kind of mess up your dimensions. So because it's a stretchy fabric, I didn't want to take any chances, so I gave myself a little bit of extra so I wouldn't pull it too much to wrap the album. So I used some Fabri-Tac adhesive. I find it works really, really well with fabric. I'm sure there's lots of other things you can use. This is just what I like. I do find that the smell isn't pleasant, so if you do use this, I would recommend working in a well ventilated area if you can. So I'm going to go ahead and start on the sides first, so the front and back covers. The reason I do this, I know usually I start with a spine, but this way I can make sure that I have everything placed properly on my batting. Whereas usually I'm putting my spine on first because I want to avoid the seams in the cardstock because I'm wrapping it with cardstock. So this time is a little different. I am going to go ahead and get these laid down, and then we'll move on. Alright, so now that we have our batting on, we're going to go ahead and lay it out on our fabric. So you're going to flip the fabric so that the front of it is facing down, and then you're going to put it batting side down, roughly centered to the best of your ability on your fabric. And once you have it centered, we are going to take a pair of scissors. Make sure that you use a pair that are sharp, that can cut your fabric well. And what we're going to do is snip in the corner of just one corner at a time, and we are going to make 3 to 4 snips to kind of create little angled tabs, I guess. I'm sure there's probably a better way to do this, but this is how I know to do it and what works best for me. I would love to hear if somebody has a better or easier way to do this. But I'm just going to cut some slits angled. Don't cut them completely off. If you're using knitted fabric, be careful, because you can easily cut to the point where it'll just pull off. So I just cut some slits, and then I use my Fabri-Tac to just kind of layer them on top of each other. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for all 4 of my corners, and then I will use my Fabri-Tac to do the long edges and the short edges as well. But I do all of my corners first, which is kind of almost opposite to what I would normally do with cardstock. So as you can see, I'm just kind of pulling them up, and then I'll layer them up. And again, I'm just going to use my Fabri-Tac. The great thing about Fabri-Tac is that it's pretty quick adhesion on it, and it doesn't really create like a really thick, hard layer with your fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and get those done, and we will move on. Alright, so once I had everything glued down, I did go ahead and kind of just trim off any excess that wasn't adhered down, just to try and keep the bulk of the album down a little bit, because we are going to be applying cardstock to the inside to finish covering it and create the binding. So I am going to go ahead and put this on my sewing machine and sew up the edges. I am going to use some gold thread for my stitching, and then I'm going to use just some basic black thread for my bobbin. I'm not going to film this. I don't really have a way to do that easily, but I just used a very basic stitch. Alright, so I am back with my finished cover. I did do the stitching, it's gold, it's pretty. I am going to go ahead and tie off the ends of my stitching just to make sure that they stay put, and then we will move on to our inside for our binding. Alright, so let's grab some black cardstock because that is the base color that I am using for my album. And we are going to start on our binding. So to do this, I am going to grab 2 pieces of my black cardstock because I'm going to need to make my binding in 2 pieces and attach them together. We're doing this because I want to put 6 pages, 6 signatures, however you want to call that, in my album, and I need to use the paper the long way, and I like to have a half-inch tab for these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my cardstock to 8.5 by 10 3/4 inches, and 10 3/4 inches is going to be the size of my pages as well. So I'm just going to cut off 1/4 inch on the short side of my cardstock, and then I am going to score them. So my first piece is going to be scored at, starting at the 2.5 inch mark. I'm going to score 8 pardon me, 12 times at the 1/2 inch mark for each one. And then once I've done that, I'm going to move on to my second piece. And when I put it on my scoreboard, I'm going to start on the end. Instead of starting at like 0, I'm going to count backwards. And I am going to score it 6 additional times. And then the 1/2 inch one on the first one on the end and the 1/2 inch one at the beginning on my second are going to get glued together. So let's go ahead and get that done. So now that I have them scored, I'm going to take my piece that only has, or that has the most scores on it, and I'm going to trim off the last 1/2 inch section just a tiny little bit, because when we overlap these and fold on the scores, we don't want any interference. We want it to fold nice and smoothly, because this is going to be a component that is used all the time. Every time you turn a page, it is going to be used. So we want to make sure that it's nice and clean and nice and flat. So once we have them scored and cut, we are going to go ahead and fold on all of our scores and then attach it. I have done this binding on multiple videos, so I'm not going to really go in depth on it again. I'm just going to create it the same way that I always do. I'm going to glue the 2 pieces together, and to do so I just use double-sided adhesive and liquid glue, which is how I make all of my bindings for all of my albums. So we'll get that done and move on. Alright, so now that we have the binding ready to attach, we are going to attach it. So before I go ahead and do this, I am just going to lay it out and do my best to center it. And then I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to mark on either side of the binding, just on the chipboard, so that when I have all of my double-sided adhesive strips, the backing's pulled off and my glue on it, and I'm ready to place it down, I know exactly where I'm going to put it. Unlike when you're using a cardstock cover, when you have this fabric on it, I don't know why, but I have a really hard time eyeballing it so that it's, well, straight. So I like to mark it first, and then I can't really go wrong. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we are going to pull off all of the backing for our double-sided adhesive, apply some glue, and lay it down. right, so now that we have our binding done, we are going to finish off the inside and lay some black cardstock on the inside front and inside back covers. So we're just going to cut those to 8 1/4 by 10 3/4, and we'll need one for each side. So let's go ahead and cut those, and then we will glue those down as well. So I do want to point out that the recent batch of paper that I got was not at all straight. And in some cases, the measurements were quite a bit off, in some cases by almost a 1/4 inch in some lengths and widths. So if you see me cutting extra off, that is why. The measurements that I gave you should be sound though. Alright, so to make my pages, these ones are done a little bit differently. Usually I put my pockets facing up. They're in the top pockets. This time I'm going to do side pockets. So in order to be able to do this and have the pages be as large as they are, I'm going to use some 12 by 12 cardstock, and I'm going to cut 6 pieces of 12 by 12 to 11 3/4 of an inch by 8 1/2 inches, and I'm going to score those at 1/2 inch mark on 3 sides. And then I'm going to cut another 6 pieces of cardstock. You can use 8 1/2 by 11 for this one, to 10 3/4 by 8 inches. So let's go ahead and get that done. Alright, so to prep our pages, we are going to take the ones that we just scored, and we're going to cut the corners off where there are 2 score lines that meet. We're going to do this for all 6 pages. And then we're going to go ahead and fold along the score lines. Alright, so our next step is to apply glue to the top and bottom edge of our pages, so along the short tabs that we've created, and glue this piece to one of our other pieces that we cut that were 10 3/4 by 8. The third tab that we have is going to be used to attach these pages to our spine, our binding that we created. So let's go ahead and do that for all 6 pages. Alright, so usually I don't attach my pages until after I have completed them, but I am trying something new. I'm testing both ways to see how the finished pages actually lay in the album. So we're going to go ahead and attach all 6 of these pages to our binding now. To do this, I'm just going to add some liquid adhesive on either side of these little tabs for my binding, and then insert the pages, the one on the side that has the extra little tab, and press them down. And I'm going to just do my best to get them as even on these as possible. So let's go ahead and do that for all 6. Alright, now that we have all of our pages attached to our binding, we are going to get started on the inside front cover. Now, I did do a waterfall on this. I really like waterfalls on my inside covers. I did this one a little bit differently. I came across another YouTube channel called Michelle Allen, A Creative Operation, and she has a tutorial on how to make a stacked waterfall, and I absolutely loved this idea because if any of you have watched any of my videos before, you know that I always struggle with keeping my waterfalls straight. So this technique that she uses is inspired, honestly. And I fell in love with it as soon as I saw it, so I thought I would give it a try on this album. Now, I did keep it pretty simple. My waterfall size is 4.5 by 6.5, so that I could mat 4.25 by 6.25 photo mats on it that would fit 4 by 6 photos. So there's only 5 waterfall pages, I guess, for this. And to create it, I cut one piece of black cardstock to 6.5 by 11, and I scored that at 4.5 and 6.5, and then I cut one piece of cardstock to 6.5 by 10, and I scored that at 4.5 by 5.5. And then I cut one last piece of black cardstock to 6.5 by 5, and I scored that at 4.5. Alright, so let's take those pieces that we just cut, and we are going to fold along all of the score lines. And again, this is such a unique way to make a waterfall. I absolutely love it. So as you can see, the waterfall pieces are, generally speaking, going to be perfectly aligned because you get 2 kind of for the price of 1, and then you just stack them. So it's kind of like how you do a stacked binding, which I'm not fond of that technique, but for a waterfall, I think it works perfectly. So once we're done scoring all of the score lines, or folding all of the score lines, we are going to lay these out. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my scoreboard again so that I can use the edges to get everything perfectly aligned, and then we're going to glue them down. So we're going to start with our biggest piece, and then we're going to apply the liquid adhesive on the 1-inch kind of middle section of the scored cardstock. And I'm just going to make sure that I get it really, really well, because I do want this to stick well. And then we are going to lay it down at the 5-inch mark on the scoreboard. And as you can see, it allows us to line it up absolutely perfectly. So now when we flip it back open, we have it completely centered and completely lined up. And then once we have that one pressed down and it's sticking well, we're going to go ahead and add our liquid adhesive on our last small piece on the little 1/2-inch flap. And then we're going to attach it by flipping it so that the waterfall piece is facing left, and then we're going to press the tab down, lining the edge of it up with the 5.5-inch mark. And then you can see the waterfall comes out like perfectly aligned. I guess provided you've made your cuts straight, which, you know, sometimes I have issues with. But I love how easy this is to make. There's no gluing each, you know, individual waterfall piece to a separate piece of cardstock and praying you get it all lined up. So this is probably going to be my go-to method for creating waterfalls in the future, because it is just so darn easy. So once we're done creating that, I am going to sort out how I want my page to be laid out. In the end, I decide I want my waterfall to be landscaped, and I am going to create a little closure tab for it that I will magnetize. So I just went ahead and grabbed a scrap piece of black cardstock that I have. It measured 6.5 by 2 inches. In the end, I actually cut off an extra 1/2 inch from this, and I scored at a 1-inch mark, and that 1 inch will be what I attach to the back of my waterfall. So I'm just going to fold along the score line, and then I will attach it to the back, centered, obviously. And then, like I said, I do go ahead and I take off an extra 1/2 inch. And then let's go ahead and add a magnet to the inside of the little flap that we just created and the top of our waterfall. So I'm going to go ahead and cut a piece of black cardstock to back my little handmade journaling tags cards that I made. As I mentioned in my walkthrough, I will have these available on my website for download if you are interested. So I need a piece of black cardstock that will measure 7 inches by 2 3/4 inches, because this particular journaling card is 6 3/4 by 2.5. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and pick out some pattern paper to back everything on this page, and I'm going to need to cut that to 8 1/4 by 10 1/2. And then I'm going to cut some of my kind of complementary cardstock, which I chose a pale pink from Recollections. I believe the color is Blush. And I'm going to cut my photo mats for my waterfall, and those are going to be cut to 4 1/4 by 6 1/4. I'm going to cut 5 of them. Only 4 of them will technically be mats for photos. Those will go on the inside of my waterfall. The 5th one will be for my cover because I am going to choose a 4x6 journaling card to use on my front instead. So I'm liking how this is coming along. I'm going to go ahead and use my corner chomp to chomp all of the corners on my waterfall. I am using the 1/4 inch setting on my crocodile. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm also going to do it on my little closure band as well. So I did go ahead and stamp my little camera image on my 4 blush colored photo mats. I used a Stampin' Up ink called Rococo Rose. They don't have it anymore. I think it was an in color from a couple years back now. I just found that the color was pretty close to some of the colors in the collection. So you can stamp it with whatever you want or not stamp it at all. I'm going to go ahead and glue everything together. Alright, so to finish off our little waterfall feature, we need to cut a couple pieces of pattern paper to go on our little closure flap. So I cut 2 pieces of pattern paper to 1 3/4 inches by 4 inches, and then I did use my little quarter rounder, and then I glued those on as well. So because I didn't really like how plain the little flap looked, I went through my little chipboard pieces and I found this one that just says Autumn, and I'm going to back it with some black cardstock just because I find that the sticker portions of these chipboard elements don't really stay stuck super well. They're great for when you want to test something, but they do pull off quite easily, especially if you're like more careful after you've pressed it down. So I'm just going to go ahead, back it with the cardstock, and then I'm going to glue it down to the top of my little closure flap. Alright, so to add a finishing touch to my waterfall feature, the space above the photo mats inside the waterfall, the little 1/2 inch strip, I want to kind of decorate that just to add a little bit more detail to the waterfall. So I'm going to take some of my pattern paper and I am going to cut 4 strips, and I'm going to cut those to 6 1/4 by 3/8 of an inch. The reason I do 3/8 of an inch is because I want to leave a little bit of space for the folds on the score lines and whatnot. If you did it exactly 1/2 an inch, you might find that there's a little bit of crinkling in the corners. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll get those glued down as well. Alright, so I decided that my little journaling card that I made earlier, I did not like the fact that the corners weren't rounded to match the waterfall, because I did that after I had done the journaling cards. I'm just going to grab another one of these. I had cut a bunch before I started. I'm going to round the edges, and I am going to back it with black cardstock again and again. The measurement for that was 7 by 2 3/4 inches. And then once I'm done that, I'm just going to go ahead and glue my waterfall and my little journaling card down. I'm just going to try and center it however I like. I am going to pull the waterfall down a little bit further so that it's a little bit more central on the page. Alright, so that is all that we are going to get done for our first tutorial. I don't want to make these videos too long because I want people to actually want to learn how to do this. So next time we will move on to the front of our first page and we'll see how far we get. So thanks for watching, and as always, if you're interested in seeing more, don't forget to click on that subscribe button.